Shrek did not pull Fiona into the grasp of the patriarchy. He quite literally grabbed her by the shoulders and woke her up out of it and then yanked her away. I will absolutely be participating in the Shrek discourse because I have a lot to say about the cinematic masterpiece, the brilliant storytelling, and incredible social criticism that is the Shrek movie series. First of all, huge shout out to all of the Shrek fans that are willing to stand 10 toes down on this series because it deserves it. Part of the original video's criticism was that Fiona left the generational wealth and comfortable family that she had to be with Shrek. And I've heard a lot of people mention that she was locked in a tower, so she was not comfortable. But I have not heard anybody mention why she was locked in that tower and that it was the fault of that comfortable family and generational wealth. And we specifically need to talk about the lying, hypocritical, literal toad that is Fiona's father, Harold. If you want to be really technical, a frog. Shrek 2 gives us completely new context for all of the events and actions that we saw in Shrek 1, and it opens our eyes as the audience member to the idea that Fiona was in far more danger and went through much more mistreatment than just being trapped in that tower, and that the entire system, including Shrek's mistreatment, is because of the way that power is set up in the kingdom. Shrek 2 also does some of the most incredible storytelling, and it's all done through the unspoken. So we're just going to go through the plot of Shrek 2 and talk about it. At its very core, Shrek and DreamWorks for that matter, were founded to be a criticism and a spoof of the founder Jeffrey Katzenberg's former employer, the Walt Disney Company. Shrek was revolutionary and important in the animation world at the time of its release, not just because of the plot and the fact that it was a direct criticism of Disney and the fairy tale stories that they were creating at the time, but also because it trounced on Disney with its animation. Although it struggled with the animation and had to put in work to create the 3D animation that Shrek is, the very first 3D animated film wasn't created until Toy Story in 1995. That was Pixar, and at the time, it wasn't owned by Disney. Then DreamWorks splits off from Disney and decides to create a film specifically dedicated to criticizing and making fun of Disney because of the bad blood. And so they decide to lean into computer 3D animation that Disney has not developed the technology to fully implement yet. Pixar is just now revolutionizing it. So Disney doesn't end up creating a full-length 3D animated princess in the very least until Tangled in 2009. Shrek came out in 2001. So really it came as the first mainstream competitor to Pixar's 3D animation, and it beat Disney. And not only did it beat Disney, it laughed at them in the process with the plot of this movie. This is a shot of Far, Far Away in the middle of the fairy tale newlywed ball that they're throwing for Shrek and Fiona. And it's a direct reference to Disney's movie opening intro with the fireworks and Tinkerbell flying over the castle. Shrek 2 takes place very shortly after the events of Shrek 1, like only a few weeks. In Shrek 1, Shrek's home of the swamp ends up swarmed with fairy tale creatures because Lord Farquaad is kicking them out of the kingdom and they have nowhere to go, so they get sent to Shrek's swamp. Shrek wants them out of his swamp, and so he goes to Lord Farquaad, who also happens to be trying to figure out how to become a king himself, and he decides by the acquiring of the magic mirror that he can do so by becoming married to a princess. So he chooses a princess out of any three, like literally picking them like, number three, my lord, number three, just as if they're eligible bachelorettes for him to pick out of a magazine. And he ends up picking Fiona. So he sends Shrek on a quest to go rescue Fiona from her tower to bring her back to him so that he can marry her and then turn himself into a king. Fiona is a prop in all of this, and he doesn't care about Fiona, and at first, neither does Shrek. Shrek sees her as a means to getting the fairy tale creatures off of his swamp. Shrek 1 ends with them realizing they actually have a lot more in common and falling in love, in particular because Fiona has a curse on her that also makes her part ogre. The end of Shrek 1 is them getting married, and then the beginning of Shrek 2, we get the honeymoon sequence. And then, as soon as they arrive home, they receive a royal invitation from Fiona's parents to travel to far, far away and introduce her new husband to them. We then see, as the audience, that Prince Charming goes through all of the blistering winds and all of the trials to make it to Fiona and is just too late because he arrived after they've already left for their honeymoon. So, for the first time, we see that Fiona was supposed to be rescued by someone else, which could be assumed that Shrek wasn't the person who was supposed to rescue her. But until now, we had this idea that it would just be any heroic knight who could come and rescue Fiona. But this is plot point by plot point. The story that Fiona was expecting is who arrived. He just arrived a few weeks too late. Shrek, Fiona, and Donkey make the very long journey all the way to far, far away. And the first thing we see as the audience is that they are not who her parents were expecting. But again, this is really great storytelling because they are telling us this without having her parents tell Shrek and Fiona this. It's flipping back and forth between these two private conversations between these couples, and we are learning information that we did not know as the audience. As the audience, we are watching these two couples have two very different expectations and ideas about what is happening here. Fiona is thinking, yeah, they probably won't be thrilled about the fact that I'm an ogre, but they're my parents and they only put me in that tower for my own good. So now that I'm with a prince like they wanted me to be, or with a husband like they wanted me to be, they should be happy for me. But we as the audience also learn that her parents are not happy at all, not just with the fact that she's with an ogre, but they had a predetermined prince that was supposed to go save her and break the spell. And they are very surprised to see that that is not who is arriving after they've invited them to visit after their honeymoon, because they fully thought they were reaching out to Princess Fiona and Prince Charming to come and be introduced to them like the next plot in the story that they had already predetermined. So Shrek and his father-in-law's relationship gets off to a really heated start, and they have this really bad argument over dinner that I am going to break down line by line because it's that good. So Harold says something about the grandkids, and they all start to freak out about it because they literally just got back from their honeymoon. And so then Harold makes a prejudiced joke against ogres and says that is assuming you don't eat your own young. And Shrek makes a dig at Harold and says, no, we actually just prefer the princesses locked in towers. Like, how are you going to criticize me over a stereotype when you are the man who literally locked a princess in a tower? And Shrek is the only one speaking common sense here. Harold then replies and says, I only did that because I loved her, which is the same thing that Fiona told Shrek on their way into the kingdom. So it's very clear this has been drilled into Fiona that they were mistreating her and abusing her by locking her in a tower because they loved her. Then Shrek hits him with another dig back and is like, yeah, some kind of love, daycare or dragon guarded castle. Like, what do you mean you did that because you loved her? And that's where we see Harold kind of start to falter a little bit. And he's like, well, you wouldn't understand. You're not her father. So we start to see and maybe wonder if maybe there's something more going on under the surface there between that decision to send her to the tower. Fiona storms away from dinner and goes up to her room and starts to cry. And that's when we meet Fairy Godmother. And Fairy Godmother comes down and is surprised to see that Fiona is an ogre. We know because she was also expecting Fiona to be with Prince Charming and turned back into a human. But Fiona doesn't understand why she's surprised and does not even know why Fairy Godmother knows her. Fairy Godmother then sees that she's still an ogre, and you see her immediately, without saying anything, decide to continue to try and remedy the situation and get the story back on track. So she offers her a very Cinderella-like proposal. With a wave of my magic wand, I'll fix all of this, and you'll meet a prince with a ton of cash, and I'll give you everything you want, and you'll have all of this furniture to talk to, and I'll fix your ogreness about you. And Fiona's like, whoa, I don't want to fix this. That's not why. And then they end up being interrupted by Shrek, and she introduces Shrek as her husband, and Fairy Godmother is completely shocked. She's like, husband? How is that? When did that happen? Because again, we know as an audience member who have seen the movie all the way through that she was expecting them to marry Prince Charming. Although, as an audience member watching for the first time, we don't know this yet. This is the first time we've ever seen Fairy Godmother, and we don't know her connection to Prince Charming. So we are also puzzled, like Fiona, by all the way that each of these people are interacting with us. The first time that you watch through this movie, you're going through it kind of under the perspective of Fiona until you get given all of this information as time goes on. But then when you watch it back through, you can see the ways in which every single conversation and interaction was influenced by the underlying subplots and secrets that were happening in the past and off screen. This movie has incredible attention to detail, and one of the ways it does that is by telling the story in this way. A lot of these things that I'm talking about and pointing out, you wouldn't notice unless you'd already seen the movie before, because you don't find out that he's the frog prince or frog king until the very end. So you may not catch the fact that he's talking about his first kiss with his wife being walking by the lily pond. But that's what he's talking about. And then they also weave that into the point of the narrative and the plot, because he then says, yes, but that was something completely different. That was totally different. And he brushes off his own his own truth in the fact that he is a frog, and then immediately diverts to comparing Shrek to a monster. And they use his hidden storyline that we've not yet been revealed to make the point about the way that he's able to manipulate the situation and ultimately avoid the consequences and project his own insecurities of being different out onto others. Of course, this is going to be a kingdom that is prejudiced towards fairy tale creatures because the king is a fairy tale creature, or an ex-frog that's been turned into a human, so that's a fairy tale creature in hiding. So much so that his wife does not even know. And so at this point, we don't know why he's lying, but we see him actively lie to Dame Julie Andrews, which how could you ever? So Harold is in the middle of deflecting the fact that he is a frog in disguise, which his wife apparently does not know. And he ends up having Fairy Godmother show up on his balcony and say, we need to talk. He lies to his wife and gets in the car with Fairy Godmother. And then we as an audience member get given a whole bunch of new information. We learn that Prince Charming, the one that we saw earlier and who was destined to meet with Fiona, is Fairy Godmother's son, which explains a lot. It explains why Fairy Godmother knew Fiona. It explains why the king would know Fairy Godmother. And it would explain why everybody already planned for this random Prince Charming guy to be made into the king of this kingdom by marrying Fiona. We also learn that Prince Charming just got back from his failure to rescue Fiona 5 minutes ago. So again, you're reminded of how quickly time is moving here. They just got back from their honeymoon, immediately got invited and set out to far, far away, went on this huge long travel to far, far away, and got here, got in a fight, and then now this is where we are. And through all of that, Prince Charming was in the middle of making his way up to Fiona's tower and failing to capture or rescue Fiona, and got back and told his mommy what happened after she, when leaving the situation with Fiona, when she first got introduced to Fiona and Shrek, and said, wait, how did you end up as his husband? She ends up saying she needs to go quickly. She's like, yeah, I gotta go. I gotta go talk to my son, who I was expecting to be married to you, but we didn't know that at the time. So here we're like, oh, mommy, my son, crazy. That's fascinating. And then we also learn that she and Harold made a deal. And she says, "You wouldn't want me to go back on that, would you?" So we're finally getting some sort of awareness of what the heck has been going on and why everybody is not just upset about the fact that Shrek and Fiona are ogres, but that it's not Prince Charming specifically. Zooming out here for a second, though, the kingdom of Far, Far Away has a fraud king who is a frog that has made a deal with the fairy godmother of this kingdom to have her son get married to his daughter that only exists because she turned him into a human so he could marry the queen or the princess. This whole thing is a scam, and Fiona has been trapped in the center of it since the very, very beginning. As a first time watcher, though, we still don't know that he is a frog. We only just now found out that he has made some kind of deal with Fairy Godmother and is lying to his wife. And so we're like, whoa, okay, now we know there's this scam happening, but what are you hiding? That you've made this deal to essentially sell your daughter off, which again, it's far, far away in a fairy tale kingdom, which using your daughter as a political pawn is really normal, but they are making commentary on that. They are literally pointing out the fact that it is all a scam. Fairy Godmother ends her and Harold's secret conversation by suggesting he get creative and figure out something to do with Shrek. And so Harold puts a hit out on him. And you're telling me Shrek is the bad guy? And that this is the generational wealth and loving family that Shrek stole Fiona from? The king puts a hit out on his daughter's brand new, fresh off the honeymoon fairy tale husband because he is being blackmailed to some degree by the fairy godmother. And he owes her a marriage to his son. What could she have on him that is so bad that he would put a hit out on his daughter's new husband? That and his own personal prejudice against the fact that Shrek is an ogre. He doesn't care about that. But it's the very fact that if this gets out, if she goes back on her promise, he literally loses the whole kingdom. And they are the only two people who know the stakes of this situation. And right after we see Harold hire Puss in Boots to put an end to Shrek, we see Shrek going through Fiona's room because he can't sleep. And he finds the doll of Fiona holding out the handkerchief, saying word for word what she said to him when he rescued her from the tower. So we as the audience are realizing just how long this story has been planned for Fiona at the same time that Shrek is also realizing just how long Fiona's life has been planned out for her. He doesn't realize just how much and to what degree, like literally prearranged but secretly to marry Prince Charming. But also, he's realizing, like, oh, when she said that to me in the tower, that's just because she'd been told her entire life and promised this was the story, that's what was going to happen, and I took that away from her. He's realizing that she grew up being told that being an ogre was a bad thing and something to be ashamed of or afraid of. Harold interrupts Shrek going through Fiona's diary to invite him to go hunting, which is not actually hunting, it's to meet the hit that he put out for him. So Shrek goes, and Harold doesn't show up. Puss in Boots arrives, and they have their meeting and altercation, and Puss ends up telling Shrek that the king is the one who sent him to do this. And Shrek's like, what? Fiona's dad told you to do this? So much for the royal blessing. And Donkey even says, like, don't worry about it, man. Everybody wants to get you when they first meet you. And it's like, and Shrek's like, yeah, thanks. That's so nice. Lovely. And it's like, they're commenting on the fact that everybody does just hate Shrek for being an ogre, and he can't help it. The pressure of the societal prejudice against ogres is actually getting to Shrek and affecting the way that he views himself and whether or not he is a good partner for Fiona. Meanwhile, he is the only person this whole time who's had her best interest actually in mind. So while Shrek and Donkey are meeting Puss in Boots and finding out that Puss was sent to them by the king and Lillian are planning the newlywed ball for Fiona and Shrek. And Lillian is trying to make decisions and asking Harold about them. And he's like, oh, there's not even going to be a ball. It doesn't even matter. We don't even know if there's going to be a ball because he is literally planning to have Fiona's new husband taken care of. Fiona then approaches her parents looking for Shrek because her husband is now missing after he left after their argument last night. And her dad is again continuing to treat Shrek like he's done something to Fiona. Fiona then replies and says, Shrek loves me for who I am. I thought you would be happy for me. That makes me so sad because she always was just under the impression that her parents would be happy for her if she found anyone to love her, regardless of whether she was an ogre or not. But she's realizing that her being locked in that tower was not for her best interests or for her own good. She's starting to question that same thing they've been telling her all along because the truth is, it wasn't for her own good, it was for the king's own good. And again, it's nearly impossible to call Shrek the bad guy here. Shrek decides that he's going to get a happy ending for Fiona. So he decides to go to Fairy Godmother because he had the business card of her. And he breaks into her manufacturing facility of her spells. And to get in, again, the writers are incredibly brilliant in the way that they make political points with their jokes. He gets into Fairy Godmother's facility by pretending to be a union worker and playing to the front desk's lack of happiness for working for the corporation. And the guy at the front desk is like, yeah, they don't even have dental. Like, this is a commentary on capitalism and the patriarchy. And so Shrek ends up sneaking in and he meets with Fairy Godmother and she's in the middle of brewing a love potion and he asks her for a happy ending because he wants a happy ending for Fiona. He doesn't know that not only is she prejudiced against ogres, but she has a vested interest in anything against Shrek because he literally stole the kingdom from her son. But again, Shrek isn't aware of that right now. So she goes on this whole tirade talking about pulling out all of the different fairy tales as examples and saying, oh, look, no ogres, because ogres don't get happy endings. So Fairy Godmother decides that Shrek is not allowed to have a happy ending, and Shrek decides that he's not okay with that and that Fiona deserves one anyway. So he breaks into the factory even further and steals one of the potions that says happily ever after and ends up destroying the factory on his way out. And eventually, Fairy Godmother finds out what potion he's stolen and decides to get smarter about her plan. Right before Shrek takes the potion, Donkey tries to talk him out of it and says, Shrek, you love being an ogre. And Shrek says, yeah, I know, but I love Fiona more. Because at this point, the narcissistic and really abusive power system has convinced him that he is the problem for Fiona and not the people who are out here manipulating, lying, and orchestrating her entire life behind her back. As Shrek is taking the potion and changing himself for Fiona, Fiona is standing up to her parents and saying, we're just gonna leave and go back to the swamp because my husband is now missing. He's been gone overnight now. So she's like, I'm gonna go find him and take him home because it was a mistake to bring him here. So they are simultaneously choosing to do what they think is the best thing for the other person in that moment without knowing what the other one is doing. Again, Shrek and Fiona are the only ones looking out for each other's true best interests. Shrek and Donkey get transformed into a stallion, and Shrek gets transformed into a human, and everyone is falling all over Shrek, and Fiona is also transformed back into a human. And the first thing she does is scream in horror because she doesn't want to be a human. In the middle of this montage, there's another little tiny attention to detail that is again what makes this world so immersive. But Shrek arrives at the castle to tell Fiona that he's there, and you see a bird fly across the screen, and the camera pans up with the bird and transitions us to Fiona when we see her for the first time. And this is how Fairy Godmother knows that Shrek has arrived at the castle to intercept him and insert Charming, because when Shrek ended up knocking over the vat of magic in Fairy Godmother's factory, all of the workers ended up transforming into birds. So now the birds work for Fairy Godmother. And so that bird heard Shrek say that, flew across the screen, and told Fairy Godmother that he was there and to start enacting their new, smarter plan that she had talked about after Shrek destroyed the factory. So Shrek thinks that he's walking into Fiona's room, and he ends up getting trapped in a room with Fairy Godmother where she has to watch Prince Charming introduce himself as Shrek to Fiona's parents. While this is happening, Fairy Godmother is gaslighting Shrek and continuing to convince him that he is the problem and telling him to stop living in a fairy tale because Fiona has found the prince of her dreams. Meanwhile, the prince of Fiona's dreams was literally created to be the prince of her dreams because they've been setting Fiona up to dream about this prince since before she was even born. He is the fairy tale. They are the ones literally living in a fairy tale, and she is telling Shrek to stop living in a fairy tale, being convinced that he could make Fiona happy. Shrek ends up leaving because he has genuinely been convinced that it is best for Fiona if he leaves her life. At the same time, the king is going to the bar that Shrek is at to meet with Fairy Godmother again and try to back out of his manipulation of Fiona. Finally, at some point. And when he gets there, he ends up being told to give Fiona the love potion. He says that they're not getting along and he can't make Fiona fall in love with him. And in order for the spell to last and for her to stay a human, she needs to be in love. And Fairy Godmother says, I beg to differ. I make people fall in love all the time. And so she's now going to double potion Fiona by giving her the spell that will turn her human and keep her permanently human if she has true love's kiss, and then give her a love potion and trick her into kissing her son so that Fiona does truly love him and then seals the spell into keeping her as human. That is really smart and also really evil. At this point, Harold tries to turn her down and say he won't give Fiona the love potion. And this is when we, as a first time audience member, see that Harold's happily ever after itself is on the line, and that Fairy Godmother gave him his happily ever after, and she's threatening to take it away. And so Harold ultimately decides that he is going to give Fiona the potion because he can't lose being a king and being married to Fiona's mom, and them finding out that the only reason he's been married to her was because he offered to have his kid be given to the fairy godmother's son for marriage. Donkey and Shrek also find out that Charming is Fairy Godmother's son in this conversation. We've known this, but Donkey has the same reaction that we had at the beginning when we first found out and says, Mommy! And that's what makes Fairy Godmother realize that they were eavesdropping on the conversation. So Fairy Godmother and the king, because they are, again, working together, send the guard, the king's royal guard, out to hunt down Shrek and Donkey and Puss in Boots. But the only way that we find this out as an audience member is because we see Shrek and Donkey's friends watching TV, watching Shrek like it's on TV, and Far, Far Away gets compared to Hollywood all the time. Like the Far, Far Away sign is exactly like the Hollywood sign, and they are acting like it is an award show with actual talk show hosts and a red carpet. And Shrek and Donkey's friends are at home watching, and they change the channel to a spoof of Cops, and it's called Knights. And they have this whole scene of Shrek and Donkey being pursued and getting pepper sprayed, but with like actual ground pepper. and being attacked by the royal guard, all because they caught the king corroborating with the fairy godmother and found out that the Prince Charming that is pretending to be Shrek is the son of the fairy godmother. So again, they sent the royal guard after him. That is a very political point that is being made here. At one point you have Donkey commenting on the fact that he wasn't read his rights. At the ball, Fiona is realizing that the person that she's seeing in front of her really doesn't act like Shrek, and yet the king is still gaslighting her about it. He pours the poison into her cup and eventually decides not to give it to her at the very last second as she goes to drink it, but does continue to lie to her and doesn't tell her the truth about what's been going on. All he does is not give her the potion. And meanwhile, Fairy Godmother believes that Fiona is given the potion and is trying to set up an opportunity for Charming to kiss Fiona, and starts performing the performance of her life of holding out for a hero. And this finale montage of Shrek 2 is truly one of my favorite cinematic movie moments in all time. And it doesn't matter that this movie is animated. That's why I've been able to talk about this for over 30 minutes at this point. The very start of this montage begins with Donkey saying, "Run, run, run as fast as you can." And they end up coming in with the giant gingerbread man. And this is so poetic on so many levels, because this is what Lord Farquaad was saying when we were very first introduced to him, while he was torturing Gingy for information about the location of the fairy tale creatures. And he is literally holding Gingy's legs in his hand, saying, "Run, run, run as fast as you can. Can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." And the only reason that Gingy doesn't get his gumdrop buttons pulled off and is spared from the torture of Lord Farquaad is because he's interrupted with his guards notifying him that they found the magic mirror, which then leads him to Fiona. So Fiona getting introduced to Lord Farquaad's story, who was only pursuing the wishes of the grander kingdom. Lord Farquaad is only a lord, and he was pursuing the interests of the kingdom, torturing fairy tale creatures and finding out their locations, and simultaneously enacting his own plot to become a king. He started off and set Fiona on this journey by introducing her to Shrek, by sending her to capture him, started all of that off by saying, "Run, run, run as fast as you can" to Gingy. And now we wrap it all up beautifully. I am giving myself chills talking about this. We wrap it all up beautifully with Gingy and Donkey and Shrek going to save Fiona from the bigger system that was operating over Lord Farquaad by saying, "Run, run, run as fast as you can" with a giant gingerbread monster, and also the song "Holding Out for a Hero" playing behind them. It is brilliant. And Shrek's heroics here, not just Shrek's, but the whole party's heroics here, are vengeance not just for Shrek and Fiona, but for all of the fairy tale creatures. Because Lord Farquaad called Gingy a monster. Gingy says that Lord Farquaad is a monster, and Lord Farquaad says, "No, you're the monster, you fairy tale creatures poisoning my perfect world." So finally, Gingy creates a Godzilla-like monster to go take down the system that gave Lord Farquaad the right to do what he did to him. They make another political capitalism joke here as well with the Gingy monster, because he goes to pick up the coffee cup off of the Farbucks, and all of the people come running and screaming out of it, and they go directly across the street into another Farbucks. I mean, this is a political movie. This movie is also not for kids. These are jokes that would fly right over kids' heads. This is meant to be understood in depth by adults. Fairy Godmother continues this performance, and they have a battle over the magic wand, but eventually Shrek fails and Charming kisses Fiona. And if Harold had given Fiona the potion like he almost did, they would have lost and Fiona would have fallen in love with Charming. So the king growing a spine for that one moment is the only thing that saved Fiona and redeemed him from being the ultimate villain in this and dooming Fiona to a fate with Charming. You could consider Fairy Godmother as the more ultimate villain because she is blackmailing him, but that still doesn't excuse him for the things that he did. And yet he does still end up redeemed, which I would argue is my least favorite part about this movie. Ultimately, Fairy Godmother gets her wand back and decides to attack Shrek and says that ogres don't get happy endings. And the king jumps in front of Shrek and takes the blow. Then it reflects off of his armor and hits Fairy Godmother, and she disintegrates into bubbles, and her glasses and wand fall to the ground. But the king has also seemingly disappeared. Or he's not disappeared, it turns out he's just reverted back into his original form of a frog, where us as the audience and everyone there are finally made aware of the secret that Fairy Godmother had been keeping for the king and blackmailing the king with the entire movie. It's at this point that Lillian forgives him for putting a hit out on his daughter's new fiance, for lying to her the entirety of their marriage and convincing her that he was a human and not a frog, creating an entire kingdom based on prejudice against fairy tale creatures, all to hide the fact that he was a frog, creating an entire elaborate scheme and manipulative plan to force Fiona into marriage of the fairy godmother's son because he was given a false happy ending being a frog, and for ultimately ruining everything about Fiona's wedding and introduction and life and existence because he has lied about being a frog. So again, his redemption and her forgiving him and all of his atrocities to hide his horrible secret is my least favorite part about this movie, and the only part that I consider to be actual propaganda for the patriarchy. But Shrek still gives Fiona the choice. After everything, he's the only one who's given Fiona a choice in anything at all in her story the entire time. He says, Midnight, Fiona, do you want to stay this way forever? Because he would do it for her, and he says that he would, and she says, you would do that for me? And then she says, I want what any princess wants, happily ever after. And Shrek goes to kiss her thinking that she means being human, and then she says, with the ogre I married, again choosing to be with him and also to be an ogre. So ultimately, Shrek did not take Fiona away from a life of generational wealth and a comfortable, loving family. Shrek didn't even just save Fiona from the tower. Shrek, loving Fiona for who she truly is, helped expose a corrupt power system and that the entire kingdom was run and operating on manipulation and lies. He helped free not just Fiona, but all of the fairy tale creatures from the lie of the king and fairy godmother. And he offered Fiona the only choice she'd ever been given in her life about who and what she wanted to be, human or ogre. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to me talk about how important and awesome this movie series is. I really appreciate you being here. And if you like my content, make sure you're following along, and I will see you next time.